So Vice made this super interesting piece about Facebook's metaverse vision, and I want to talk about it. When it comes to the metaverse, I feel that there's a lot of fear mongering going on. There's a lot of fear mongering, and I don't know, for me, it's just discouraging because like when you just look at all media, the way that the news seems to be positioning the metaverse, they're always using adjectives that are negative, being trapped in the metaverse, the doom and gloom of the metaverse. And it just seems as though they're advertising the metaverse in a really scary way. Yes, we know that social media is in of itself, social media is a scary thing. When you actually think about what they've done with it and how they've manipulated people with it, it's a scary thing. And definitely go watch out the documentary, The Social Dilemma. I'm in the middle of watching it and it's telling me so many things that are freakish, and I'm going to make a review on that. But before I do that, I want to watch this piece that Vice has done on Facebook's metaverse, and just let's just watch it, let's review it, let's figure things out. But before we get into that, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. It really pushes this video out in the algorithm and encourages me to make more videos. This video is brought to you by Brand Video Pro. We help brands and influencers scale their influence and sales. So if that is of interest to you, head on over to our website, click the link down below, and find out how we can help you. All right, let's begin.
In October 2021, CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced he was changing Facebook's name to Meta and expanding its borders into the Metaverse.
What is the Metaverse?
Metaverse. In the Metaverse.
The Metaverse will be the successor to the mobile internet.
The company promises a new reality, full of avatars and futuristic worlds.
Today, we're going to talk about the Metaverse. I want to share what we imagine is possible.
It comes as other billionaires are venturing into new realms. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have poured billions into space projects.
I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer, because you guys paid for all of this.
But as these businessmen expand their territories, there are growing concerns about how their technologies are impacting the world.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
On January 6th, the group of Trump supporters violently stormed the US Capitol building.
I was at risk of being stripped of and killed with my own firearm as I heard chants of kill him with his own gun.
Documents leaked by whistleblower Frances Haugen shone a new light on how Facebook did little to stop the attack.
Like they basically said, oh good, we made it through the election. There wasn't riots. We can get rid of civic integrity now. Fast forward a couple months, we got the insurrection.
And revealed how the company knew it was spreading hate and misinformation on a global scale. From stoking ethnic violence in Ethiopia to fueling a genocide in Myanmar.
The more we're invisible, the more harm is done. And we've seen this in Myanmar, and we've seen it in India, and we're living it in Ethiopia now.
So why does Facebook, now Meta, continue to put profit ahead of the safety of its users?
So this is actually the conversation that was had in The Social Dilemma, and I am going to make a video to cover that. But it's a really interesting, well, we know that at the end of the day, kind of the point that they made in that documentary is that when you get a product for free, or let me put it this way, you're either being sold. If you're not being sold, you are the product. And that's what social media is. Because social media is free, we are the product, and they're using us to sell, as we know, to sell to advertisers. But they've designed social, they've used gambling. Like the engineers have looked at the way gambling gets us excited. Like every time you refresh your social media, it always like comes with new stuff comes in your feed, and it's like it's like one of those gambling machines where like when you push the slot down and all of a sudden you get new numbers, and it gives you the same essence or the same feeling as gambling. So they break that down in that documentary, and that's essentially what Facebook or all social media is doing. They're using us, they're selling us to advertisers. Now, Is that the worst thing in the world? I don't know. Right now, it's not the worst thing because it doesn't harm us necessarily. Well, I mean, as we watch this, we're going to see how bad it really is. But in terms of like using us and sell, that's what television has done historically, you know. But I guess like social media has more information about the users than television could ever have had. So that's a scary thing. But I don't think I don't know that it's the worst thing in the world. But I guess what I'm saying is, what you don't know, you don't know. And until we know how detrimental it will become to us, then, and it's like we're going to have to wait for the after effects. Facebook already knows how detrimental it is to us. And I'm not talking about stuff like, you know, mental health and all of that stuff, but I mean actually them selling ads and selling our data, selling our movement, selling our information to companies. That is what they're doing, that component to it. I don't know that that's a terrible thing, but I mean, to each his own. But the sacrifice you make is you don't get access to social media if you don't want to sell your information. So I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world, but Facebook knows whether it is or it isn't. And I don't know how we can demand from them that they are more transparent. But these are the conversations that are being had around this situation.
This research is not a bombshell. It's not causal research. It's in fact just
Well, I beg to differ
research
with
that
you,
we
Ms.
use for
Davis.
product teams.
This research is a bombshell.
And as the world follows Mark Zuckerberg into the metaverse, can we trust it?
When it comes to the metaverse and the way it is now, I don't think it's that much different from social media. The amount of information these devices will get from us, I don't think it is as much. Maybe it is because it's actually more intimate and in your eyes, so they can actually see your eye. If they're recording your eyes and recording how your eyes read stuff, maybe then that's more freaky. But the kicker is once Elon Musk releases Neuralink, which is he's trying to put a chip in your brain that changes the way that we use data, and you'll just think something and the information comes at you. So instead of Googling stuff, you just think it and it pops up in your head. That's the part that's invasive. But I don't know how invasive these VR headsets are yet, or if they're any more invasive than our cell phones.
Facebook's rebranded may be a cynical attempt to shift focus from its numerous failures.
It sounds like
That's
we
true.
made a mistake there. I apologize for that. In retrospect, it was a mistake. We have made a lot of mistakes in running the company. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
But the metaverse, at least on the surface, promises a new era.
Today, we are seen as a social media company. But in our DNA, we are a company that builds technology to connect people. And the metaverse is the next frontier.
So this was an inevitable sort of next step in the evolution of social media, allowing the virtual physical presence of the people that you're connected to from around the world to you.
Boy.
Oh, hey, Mark. Hey, what's going on?
Hi,
Mark.
What's up, Mark?
Whoa, we're floating in space? Who made this place? It's awesome.
What Mark Zuckerberg is doing is he's trying to advance his pocketbook. Zuckerberg was the future once. Now it's VR, and he's trying to get into it.
More data makes good business sense.
Facebook has a very clear business model that's driven by the need to gather as much data about their consumers or users as possible.
But there are fears that the new data we create in the metaverse could lead to a privacy nightmare.
Facebook has made a big deal about the fact that it's not going to be doing facial recognition on photos that you upload to Facebook anymore. But it hasn't.
Okay, so I just to interrupt, we're thinking about how is the metaverse going to collect more data than what we have right now with the mobile internet, and I think than what we have right now with the mobile internet, and I think the answer to that is the fact that right now, as it stands, when we go on different apps, it's those individual apps that are going to be collecting our data. But the way that it's going to have to be in the future, as Mark Zuckerberg has pointed out, and if you look at a lot of people that go into the metaverse and look at how their complaints, it's about always having to change their avatar for different games or different apps on the metaverse. So one thing that Mark Zuckerberg talks about is the fact that we have to have one metaverse with multiple companies that build it. So there are going to have to be multiple companies that come together to build it. So what does this mean? There's going to have to be a collaboration of information or data collection, a collaboration. And I think what I have to propose is that government, and I've made a video about this and I've broken this down, but governments need to regulate this. Now you need to go watch the video that I broke this down, and I sort of talked about what degrees, like the different countries having control over this, etc. I break that down in more depth, but I do think that government needs a role. But the issue that we're finding right now with the government, like let's look at the US, for example, is that the government works too slow. It works too slow to implement. So I don't think that the government needs to be specifically a government that is run by the real world, but somehow, some way, it needs to be sort of like this governmental metaverse organization that is sort of deciding what happens. And these governmental organizations should answer to various governments around the world, or at least collaborate with governments in the world. I think that's the way we need to look at it, so that things can be, but there are other ways to look at it, and I'm open to hearing different ideas, so please leave a comment down below. But there needs to be sort of a solution that ensures that there are policies in this metaverse space, that these social media companies or these metaverse companies do not exploit their users, and it sort of like follows human rights issues without limiting the development or the advancements of technology. So that's kind of the line that we're going to have to dance in, that mixture of like acting fast whilst creating policies but not limiting the advancements of technology. And as we see it, if Facebook did not collect our data, if Google did not collect our data, if all these companies didn't collect our data the way they do, they wouldn't have made the ridiculous amounts of money that they've made, more money than any company has made in history. All of these big tech companies, they wouldn't have made this much money, which would have stunted in a way the growth of technology. So that's one perspective and one way to look at it. But let's keep going.
That it's not going to do facial recognitions in the metaverse. And so the point is they're building an AI-driven engine that will be manipulating even more effectively behavior in the metaverse than it's been able to manipulate in real space.
And although generating more data is not necessarily harmful, it could give companies like Facebook an unprecedented amount of control.
Mark Zuckerberg holds as much or more power over the connection and communications that people have than anyone ever has before.
So long as that business model doesn't change, Meta is a much more terrifying version of what Facebook is in the real world right now.
Just weeks before Facebook's rebranding, former employee Frances Haugen released thousands of internal documents. The papers show the potential harm of its products, harm that could be amplified in the metaverse.
I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
The leak suggests Facebook knew how damaging its products could be and ignored employees who had concerns.
It is proven that every time they denied these things before, they were not just unfair in their denials and attacks on independent researchers, but they knew that those people were right. And that takes it from, just being defensive to being deceptive.
According to Facebook's own research reported by the Wall Street Journal, their platforms make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls.
None of it came as a massive surprise. Instagram harms kids. I remember telling a 13-year-old about it. And she was like, yeah, everyone knows that.
Facebook may be having its big tobacco moment. In the 90s, CEOs of big tobacco firms stood up in Congress and attempted to play down the dangers of cigarettes.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Imagine a world in which cigarettes gave people cancer, but only the tobacco companies knew that, and only the tobacco companies had any chance of finding out. In that world, I think it would be extremely important for someone within the companies to come forward and tell the world what they know.
There needs to be I mean, the whistleblower is doing a great job, but I think there needs to be some internal investigations. It's almost as though it's almost like a health, like how the health department checks, restaurants and grocery stores, etc., to just make sure that things are running smoothly. I think that's required for Facebook. The only issue is, and they're going to break this down in a bit, is that the different countries don't have the same sort of government support, and that can be an issue. If Facebook does that, it starts getting these corrupt countries going in and looking in at their business practices, that can be problematic. But at the same time, it's a difficult line. It's a difficult line between these tech companies being responsible, and if they continue to abuse their power, this is going to happen. Government is going to have to intervene. But we really don't want government to stunt their growth. And if government has to intervene, their growth will be stunted. So it's really important that these companies, self-regulate so that they do not put themselves in the position, and they stop exploiting people so they don't put themselves in the position to be stunted by the government. And this is what we need to talk about, the government entering the metaverse. What does that need to look like?
These companies have played a very, very clever game in trying to protect their reputations despite the amount of harm they produce. And that's why now Facebook and Google spend more than Philip Morris and Exxon on lobbying in the US.
These deceptions can have dangerous consequences. In January, Trump supporters stormed the US Capitol building. The leak suggests Facebook failed to take steps to mitigate the spread of misinformation and polarizing content on its platform.
Extremists used many platforms, but Facebook is a recurring theme.
For years, this platform was allowing itself to be used to sow distrust in elections and to build more and more anger in these communities.
Some safeguards put in place for the 2020 election were rolled back in the lead up to the attack.
They had a whole series of circuit breakers, as they would call them, to kind of slow down the craziness that was obviously developing. But late into the afternoon of January 6th, they hadn't even pulled the trigger on.
I think this is very difficult, the way that they're pushing blame on Facebook for this, because Facebook is a platform that people are going to use how they use it. Same way, that's like blaming the inventors of paper for, the riots that happened in the past. Yes, of course, sending a letter takes a lot longer than sending a Facebook message. But if it's not going to be Facebook, it's going to be WhatsApp. If it's not going to be WhatsApp, it's going to be Discord. It's going to be some messaging platform online. So to blame Facebook, it's difficult to me. It's difficult to me for them blaming Facebook for this. I do acknowledge the contribution that Facebook has made. These public groups, these public pages that people are using to spew all this hate speech. This is problematic. Yes, they can sort of do something to diminish that. But regardless, if they're not going to use these public platforms, they're going to use message groups. They're going to find something. So I think we have to be careful blaming the platforms for this. It's not the platform's fault. I don't know that I can blame the platform. I think these governments need to be more accountable in these situations. It's a tough one. Everybody is responsible, especially the government for when it comes to these Trump riots, I'm going to call them that. That was Donald Trump. That was the U.S. president that was doing that. So you can't really blame Facebook for that when the U.S. president is telling people to go and riot, So I don't know.
More than half of them.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Look, nobody should think that they caused January 6th, but certainly if it weren't for Facebook, it would have been harder to develop the extraordinary organization and capacity that January 6th revealed.
Weeks after Frances Haugen's revelations, Facebook and its other products, Instagram and WhatsApp, were hit by a major power outage.
It was so bad that the only way Facebook could let the world know what was going on, and this is true, was by posting a message on Twitter.
The outage showed how much the world relies on Facebook, for better and for worse. For over a year, Ethiopia has been locked in a brutal civil war.
In August, 28 bodies, some with hands tied and bullet holes, washed up on the shores of a river on the Sudanese border. Witnesses believe they came from Tigray. The Ethiopian government called the discovery a fake propaganda campaign.
We don't know how many have died because we don't have a real body count so far, but it's one of the bloodiest war we've seen so far.
Facebook knew it was being used to incite ethnic violence in the country, but did little.
But it also is used to spread information that is factual. You know, social media helps in that way too. So it's like they're only highlighting the negative components of social media. I think about NSARS in Nigeria. If not for social media and us being able to display to the world what was happening, no one would have believed it. And it's the same thing that they're explaining now. The government is claiming that these bodies are fake, but apparently somebody showed it on social media, which proved that it was real. So these are a few things to think about.
We've seen state and non-state actors using the platform to spread misinformation and disinformation to an extent where you'd have content that's, calling for ethnic extermination of certain ethnic groups. We know that, different militia groups were organizing using the platform.
So I have to say, when it comes to misinformation, it's very, very... This is a big issue across all social media. And, TikTok actually right now, I think where the most misinformation is being spread right now that I'm seeing is TikTok. It reminds me of YouTube in the earlier days where they would make these ridiculous documentaries that were just like lies. You just see that on YouTube. Now that's where TikTok, where people are spreading misinformation. But it seems Facebook is still doing this because Facebook has a very large global audience.
To raise money for arms, getting many other things that would be against many international laws.
A deadly conflict fueled by Facebook, and not for the first time.
Wow.
The company is also accused of playing a role in the brutal crackdown of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar in 2017.
What the papers demonstrate is that the government in Myanmar used the Facebook platform to exacerbate ethnic division, which led to genocide in Myanmar.
They're not to blame for the existence of folks, who are pursuing a genocidal campaign, but they did deliberately become the engine.
I love how they cut her off. The engine for what, though? Because Facebook doesn't control how the users use their apps. I was watching that documentary that I mentioned earlier, The Social Dilemma. They build these products or these features, and they have no idea the impact that these features are going to have. So yes, now that they're finding out that people are using this for bad, which is natural, people are going to use it for good, people are going to use it for bad. It is their responsibility to regulate in some way, especially if they have the AI that can tell us about COVID, when COVID misinformation is spreading. They certainly have the AI that can tell us when it comes to ethnic wars. They should have the AI to be able to regulate that. But it just seems as though they're not putting in the money to do it because some of these are third world countries. So they're sort of ignoring the issues because there's no real government that's holding them accountable in these countries. So that's another issue here. It seems as though, what I call it, geographical racism in a way, that is fueling their negligence. So that's something that they should be held accountable for. Absolutely.
This is a global problem. In Vietnam, Facebook bowed to pressure from the government to censor content. And in India, Facebook's platforms have been inundated with a torrent of anti-Muslim hate speech. Part of the problem is the lack of investment Facebook places outside the US.
90% of Facebook's audience is outside the United States. But 90% of Facebook's safety budget is inside the United States.
So they are literally incapable of any moderation at all in many, many countries around the world. And what that means is that hate and misinformation are flowing even more rapidly in other countries.
For activists, the reported lack of consideration given to other countries came as little surprise.
And we all have to sort of live with the consequences of a system that makes us completely invisible. And the more we're invisible, the more harm is done. And we've seen this in Myanmar, and we're living it in Ethiopia now.
The cost of them fixing their platforms is actually that they have to hire people. The cost of them doing nothing is zero. And so they've calculated, of course, it's so much cheaper to let the world burn.
Wow. That is terrible. Because they have the money to invest in this. And unfortunately, it's only countries that are developed that their governments are going to hold them accountable. So what happens to those countries that are not going to be able to hold them accountable? What then happens? Whose job is it? Is it the UN? Whose job is it to is it Amnesty International? Whose job is it to make sure these social media platforms are held accountable?
In the US, politicians are growing angry.
Mark Zuckerberg ought to be looking at himself in the mirror today. And yet, rather than taking responsibility and showing leadership, Mr. Zuckerberg is going sailing.
But have so far been unable to rein in the once untouchable company.
Mark Zuckerberg has proven that he is not the one to be trusted with dominating the next level, which will now be the metaverse, when he hasn't even addressed any of these issues.
Facebook might be the winner of the next generation too, and that would be a disaster, because the truth is they've administered this generation appallingly badly.
For many, it begs broader questions.
Our current debates about tech platforms like Meta, like Facebook, are debates about what kind of culture, what kind of society we want to live in. In an increasingly globalized world, that's a more and more challenging question to answer.
Very interesting. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. My name is Kenim, and see you next time. A peace.